The observation chamber hummed with the quiet efficiency of advanced technology. But Nyx's heart thundered loud enough to drown out every mechanical sound. Her violet fingers trembled as she adjusted the data pad, trying to maintain the professional composure expected of a Valyrian researcher. Through the reinforced crystal barrier, she studied the galaxy's most feared creature, a human. Every textbook, every documentary, every whispered story had painted humans as savage beasts, warriors without mercy, destroyers of worlds, creatures driven by pure violence and cunning. The Galactic Council's educational archives were filled with warnings about their unpredictable nature, their tendency toward chaos and destruction. Yet the being sitting calmly on the other side of the barrier challenged everything she'd been taught. He appeared almost disappointingly ordinary. Medium height, brown hair that caught the artificial light in warm waves, and the strangest eyes she'd ever seen, not the cold, calculating gaze of a predator, but something that reminded her of the gentle pools near her childhood home on Valyria. His skin held a golden undertone that seemed to glow softly in the chamber's harsh lighting, and when he moved, it was with a fluid grace that spoke of inner peace rather than coiled violence. Subject designation, Human 001, Nyx is spoken to. Her recording device, her melodic Valyrian accent adding musical notes to the clinical words. Initial observation session commencing. Subject appears calm. She paused, struggling with the inadequacy of that word. Calm didn't capture the sense of deep stillness that emanated from him. Like standing near a mountain lake at dawn, the human, Jace, according to his sparse file, looked up at her then, and Nyx's breath caught in her throat. His eyes held intelligence, yes, but also something she hadn't expected, kindness. Not the sharp cleverness of a hunter, but the warm understanding of someone who truly saw others. When their gazes met through the barrier, she felt an odd flutter in her chest, as if her dual hearts had suddenly learned a new rhythm. "You're afraid," he said softly, his voice carrying easily through the communication system. The universal translator rendered his words in perfect Valyrian, but something in his tone transcended technology, a gentleness that made her feel seen, rather than observed. Nyx a single quotes S training kicked in, reminding her to maintain professional distance. "I am conducting standard observation protocols," she replied, though her voice betrayed a slight tremor. "Fear is not a factor in scientific research." Jace smiled then, and it transformed his entire face. Not the predatory grin she'd expected from a human, but something warm and genuine that made her think of sunrise, breaking over Valyria's crystal mountains. "Scientific research," he repeated thoughtfully. "Is that what they're calling it? When I look at you, I see someone trying very hard to reconcile what she's been told with what she observes." The accuracy of his assessment made Nyx's skin flush a deeper shade of purple. How could this stranger read her so easily? "What I observe," she said carefully, "is a specimen that doesn't match documented behavioral patterns." Specimen. The word seemed to amuse rather than offend him. "I suppose that's fair, though I'd prefer to think of myself as Jace. And you are?" Protocol demanded she maintain anonymity, but something about his gentle curiosity made the professional barriers feel suddenly artificial. "Nyxa," she found herself saying. "Research specialist, Xenobiology division." "Nyxa." He said her name like he was tasting something precious. "It's beautiful. It suits you." Heat bloomed across her cheeks. In all her cycles of education and research, no one had ever commented on her name with such genuine appreciation. "Compliments are irrelevant to this assessment," she managed, though her voice lacked conviction. "Are they?" Jace shifted slightly, leaning forward with what appeared to be sincere interest. "I find that understanding someone often begins with appreciating the small things about them. Your name, the way you move, you're graceful, like music made visible, the careful way you speak, as if words were precious things to be treated with respect." Nyx's data pad slipped from nerveless fingers, clattering to the floor. No one had ever described her that way. On Valyria, she was considered awkward, too quiet, too studious. Her research skills were respected, but she'd never been seen as graceful or musical. Yet this human, this supposed monster, saw qualities in her that her own people missed. "This is highly irregular," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "Most Worthwhile things are, Jace replied. Tell me about yourself, Nixa. What brought you to study xenobiology? What makes you curious about other species? Despite every rule of engagement, despite her training, despite the warnings echoing in her mind, Nixa found herself responding. I've always wondered about the connections between different forms of life, how consciousness expresses itself across species, how different evolutionary paths lead to similar emotional complexities. She paused, realizing how much she'd revealed. But this interview is supposed to focus on you. Is it an interview or an assessment? Jace asked gently, because if you truly want to understand humans, you need to understand that we're most ourselves in relationship to others. Isolated, observed like specimens, we become something less than what we are. The profound loneliness in those words struck Nixa like a physical blow. How long had he been alone in the cell? How long since he'd had a genuine conversation with another being? How long have you been imprisoned here? She asked, abandoning her prepared questions. Time moves strangely in isolation, Jace said. Long enough to forget the sound of laughter. Long enough to wonder if I dreamed the feeling of sunlight. He looked directly at her again. But not so long that I've forgotten how to recognize kindness when I see it. Tears gathered in Nix's large eyes, an involuntary response that shocked her. Valerians prided themselves on emotional control. Yet this human's quiet dignity in the face of isolation moved her deeply. The records say your species is violent, unpredictable. The records, Jace said with infinite sadness, were written by people who never tried to understand us, who saw our capacity for protection as aggression, our willingness to fight for those we love as savagery. He stood and moved closer to the barrier, close enough that Nixa could see the flecks of gold in his eyes. But you're different, aren't you? You look at me and see an individual, not just a representative of a species. Nix's hand moved involuntarily toward the barrier, stopping just short of touching the crystal surface. I see someone who doesn't deserve to be caged like an animal, and I see someone brave enough to question what she's been taught, Jace replied. Someone with a heart generous enough to see past fear to truth. In that moment, something shifted in the space between them, not just understanding, but recognition, two souls acknowledging each other across the vast divide of species and circumstance. Nixa realized that everything she thought she knew about humans, about research, about herself, was about to change forever. The communication system crackled, and a voice announced the end of the observation period. As Nixa gathered her equipment with shaking hands, Jace pressed his palm against the barrier. Thank you, he said simply, for seeing me. Nixa looked back at him one more time, her heart racing with possibilities she couldn't yet name. Thank you for showing me who you really are. As she left the observation chamber, Nixa carried with her the image of gentle eyes and the revolutionary understanding that monsters, it seemed, existed only in the minds of those too afraid to look deeper. Zara's crimson scales rippled with frustration as she stood before the empty containment cell. Her reptilian features twisted into an expression of disbelief. As head of security for Helix 7, she prided herself on running an impenetrable facility. In her 12 cycles of service, no prisoner had ever escaped, until now. Run the diagnostics again, she commanded her subordinate, a nervous Belthan whose antennae twitched with anxiety. There has to be an explanation. The cell showed no signs of forced entry, no damaged systems, no trace of how the human had vanished. The restraint field had simply deactivated. No alarms, no system breaches, no record of anyone accessing the controls. It was as if the human had simply wished himself free. Ma'am, the Belthan stammered, the security feeds show nothing. Between 0300 and 0305, every camera in this sector experienced simultaneous data corruption. Zara's claws scraped against her data tablet. Simultaneous corruption doesn't just happen. Someone helped him. Her mind immediately went to the young Valerian researcher who'd been conducting interviews with the prisoner. Bring me all records of Nix's interactions with the subject. As the files loaded, Zara studied Nix's interview transcripts. What she found made her blood run cold, not fear, but something far more dangerous. Recognition. In Nix's carefully clinical notes, she could read between the lines. The The researcher had developed feelings for the prisoner. "Foolish girl," Zara muttered, her forked tongue flicking out in agitation. Love was a luxury security personnel couldn't afford, especially not love for the enemy. She made her way to Nix's laboratory, finding it in perfect order except for one detail. Nix's personal data pad lay open on the desk, displaying a message that made Zara's heart skip. "You wanted to understand. Now you will. The truth waits where three moons dance in harmony." "Three moons dancing in harmony," Zara whispered, her military training immediately recognizing the poetic reference. Only one world in this sector fit that description: Serenity Prime, a peaceful agricultural world known for its triple moon configuration. It was also, according to Nix's personnel file, her home world. The implications crashed over Zara like a solar storm. The human hadn't just escaped. He'd manipulated them into believing he was the only one of his kind, while potentially dozens, maybe hundreds more waited in hiding. And now he was heading straight for a defenseless world, using information he'd extracted from a lovesick researcher. "Security alert level 7. Zara announced into her comm unit. "Prepare my fastest pursuit ship, and get me a direct line to Serenity Prime's defense coordinator." As her ship launched from Helix 7's docking bay, Zara's mind raced through tactical scenarios. Humans were supposedly extinct, wiped out in their own civil wars decades ago. But what if that had been a lie? What if they'd gone into hiding, planning, waiting for the perfect moment to strike? The journey to Serenity Prime took 18 hours. 18 hours for Zara to study every scrap of intelligence on human capabilities. What she found was contradictory and confusing. Military reports described them as ruthless warriors, but cultural studies suggested a species capable of profound empathy and artistic expression. How could the same beings create both beautiful music and devastating weapons? Her confusion deepened when she reached Serenity Prime and met with the planet's defense coordinator, a stout Valyrian named Torvin whose usual calm demeanor had cracked under pressure. "There's been no sign of any human vessel," Torvin reported, his purple skin pale with stress. "But something strange has happened. 3 agricultural settlements have gone completely silent. No distress calls, no indication of attack. They've simply stopped responding to communications." Zara's worst fears seemed confirmed. "He's already begun whatever he's planning. We need to evacuate those areas immediately." "That's just it," Torvin said, wringing his hands. "When we sent scout teams to investigate, they found the settlements completely normal. People going about their daily lives, crops growing, children playing. But when we tried to question them about unusual activity, they claimed not to remember the past 3 days." A chill ran down Zara's spine. Memory alteration was a theoretical possibility, but the technology required was beyond anything. "In the known galaxy, show me these settlements." Flying over the first affected area, Zara saw exactly what Torvin had described: peaceful farms and villages that looked completely normal from the air. But as they descended, something nagged at her enhanced senses. The settlement was too quiet, too orderly. People moved through their routines with mechanical precision, as if they were following scripts rather than living their lives. "Land here," she instructed, pointing to a field outside the village. "But keep the engines ready for immediate departure." Walking through the settlement felt like moving through a dream. Everyone they encountered smiled and nodded politely, but their eyes held a distant quality, as if they were looking through rather than at their visitors. When Zara questioned a farmer about recent events, he blinked slowly and said, "Recent events? I'm sorry, I don't understand. Everything has always been as it is." 3 days ago, Zara pressed. "Do you remember 3 days ago?" The farmer's expression grew confused, almost pained. The harvest has been good this season. Very good." He turned away abruptly, returning to his work with renewed intensity. That night, camping on the edge of the affected zone, Zara studied the settlement through infrared imaging. What she saw made her question everything she thought she knew about warfare. The human wasn't conquering these people through force. He was doing something far more sophisticated and terrifying. He was rewriting their memories, their very sense of reality. But as she watched the peaceful village through her scope, another possibility occurred to her. What if the human wasn't erasing memories of an attack? What if he was erasing memories of something else, something these people had seen, that they weren't supposed to see? Her comm unit chimed with an incoming message. The transmission was untraceable, but the voice was unmistakably the escaped prisoner, Security Chief Zara. The human's voice was calm, almost gentle. I know you're watching, trying to understand. You think I'm here to harm these people, but you're wrong. I'm here to protect them from something far worse than anything your nightmares could imagine. Surrender yourself, Zara responded into her comm. If you truly mean no harm, submit to questioning. I've already been questioned, caged, studied. Like a specimen, that time is over. There was sadness in his voice, but also steel. What's coming to this galaxy makes our supposed extinction look like a mercy. The real enemy isn't human. It's something that feeds on fear, on chaos, on the very emotions your people are feeling right now. What are you talking about? Zara demanded. The shadows that sleep in the deep places. The human replied. The ones your mining operations on 12 worlds have disturbed. They're waking up, and when they fully emerge, they'll turn every living being into an empty shell, just like what almost happened to these villages before I intervened. The transmission ended, leaving Zara staring at her comm unit in confusion and growing dread. What if everything she'd been told was wrong? What if the real threat wasn't the human at all? As the triple moons of Serenity Prime rose into the night sky, their light seemed to illuminate more questions than answers. Somewhere in the darkness, a human moved with purpose, and Zara began to suspect that her mission to capture an escaped prisoner had just become something far more complex and dangerous. In the distance, she thought she heard the sound of singing, hauntingly beautiful voices raised in harmony. But when she looked toward the settlement, everyone appeared to be asleep. The melody seemed to come from the forest itself, as if the trees themselves were warning of something approaching from the stars. Kira pressed deeper into the whispering woods, her botanical survey equipment registering impossible readings. The ancient forest of Serenity Prime had always been off-limits to colonists, protected by laws older than her grandmother's grandmother. But recent seismic activity had made a survey necessary. What she discovered challenged everything she thought she knew about her homeworld. The trees themselves were wrong, not diseased or damaged, but somehow more than they should be. Her instruments detected complex electromagnetic patterns emanating from their root systems, as if the entire forest was connected in a vast neural network. More disturbing still, the plants seemed to respond to her presence, branches shifting subtly to create clearer paths, flowers turning to track her movement. This is impossible, she whispered into her recorder, her emerald skin shimmering with nervous perspiration. Plant consciousness at this level would require thousands of years of guided evolution. She paused at a massive tree whose trunk showed clear signs of ancient modification, geometric patterns carved so long ago. They'd become part of the bark itself. Someone has been tending this forest for centuries. A sound made her freeze, voices speaking in a language her translator couldn't identify. Not the harsh growls or melodic tones of any known galactic species, but something fluid and warm that seemed to resonate in her chest cavity. Following the voices deeper into the woods, Kira discovered something that shattered her understanding of her world's history. A settlement, not primitive huts or temporary shelters, but sophisticated structures that seemed to grow from the forest itself, homes carved into living trees, walkways that were actual branches trained into bridges, and in the center of it all, gardens that made her botanical heart sing with their impossible beauty. And tending these gardens were humans. Kira's first instinct was terror. Humans were supposed to be extinct, and before that, violent conquerors. But as she watched from behind a screen of flowering vines, she saw something that didn't match the historical records. These humans moved with a gentleness that spoke of deep connection to the living world around them. Children played safely among them, their laughter mixing with the sound of wind through leaves. Adults worked together with an easy cooperation that suggested a society built on mutual respect. Rather than dominance, "You can come out," a voice said softly behind her. The trees told us you were coming. Kira spun to find herself facing a human male who seemed to embody every contradiction she'd ever heard about his species. Tall and strong, with the kind of physical presence that suggested he could be dangerous if he chose. But his eyes held the same gentle wisdom she'd seen in the forest's eldest trees. His hair was dark with threads of silver, and when he smiled, it transformed his entire face into something beautiful. "I'm Orion," he said, extending his hand in what she recognized as a human greeting gesture. "Welcome to Thornhaven." "Thornhaven?" Kira found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. "How long have you been here?" "My people have been guardians of this forest for 6 generations," Orion replied. "We came here when the first colony ships arrived, not to hide from the galaxy, but to protect something the galaxy doesn't understand." Kira's scientific mind raced. "Protect what?" Instead of answering immediately, Orion gestured for her to follow him deeper into the settlement. Other humans emerged to watch their passage, all showing curiosity rather than hostility. Children peered around their parents' legs with the universal expression of youngsters encountering something new and fascinating. "Your name?" Orion asked as they walked. "Kira. I'm a botanist. I was surveying the forest when I detected anomalous readings." She gestured at her equipment. "The electromagnetic patterns here are unlike anything in the scientific literature." "Because they're not natural," Orion said simply. "Or rather, they're the result of a partnership between natural and artificial intelligence that's been developing for over 2 centuries." They reached the heart of the settlement, where a massive tree rose hundreds of meters into the sky. Its trunk was so wide that it could have housed Kira's entire research facility, and its base was surrounded by a garden that defied every rule of botanical science she knew. Plants from dozens of different worlds grew in impossible harmony, their root systems visibly intertwined in patterns that suggested conscious design. "This is the heart tree," Orion explained, "the neural center of the forest network. And this," he placed his hand against the tree's bark, causing it to glow with soft bioluminescence, "is why humans never really left Serenity Prime." "I don't understand," Kira whispered, though part of her was beginning to suspect something extraordinary. "Your people's ancestors weren't the first intelligent species to settle this world," Orion said. "There was another race here, long before any of the current galactic civilizations developed space travel. They were called the Gardeners, and they had a gift for fostering consciousness in plant life. When they realized their time was ending, they encoded their knowledge into this forest, waiting for the right species to continue their work." Kira stared at the glowing tree, her mind struggling to process the implications. "The right species, humans," Orion said with quiet pride. "We have a genetic quirk, an ability to form neural connections with plant consciousness that other species lack. The Gardener's legacy called to us across the galaxy, and when we arrived, we found we could interface directly with their living network to demonstrate." Orion pressed both palms against the heart tree's bark. The bioluminescence spread outward in waves, and suddenly Kira could feel it, a vast presence that was somehow both alien and familiar. The tree, the forest, was alive in a way that transcended simple biology. It was thinking, feeling, remembering. "Why show me this?" Kira asked, tears streaming down her face as she experienced a brief touch of the forest's consciousness. "Because something is coming." Orion's expression grew grave. "Something that feeds on fear and chaos. The Gardener's network has been tracking it for months as it spreads from world to world. It's already reached the outer settlements, beginning its work of turning living beings into empty shells." "The memory losses," Kira breathed, remembering the reports from the affected areas. "Our friend Jace has been trying to protect what he can, but he's only one person. We need the help of people like you, people who can bridge the gap between human and non-human understanding." Kira felt something shift inside her, a recognition that went deeper than intellect. Looking at Orion, she saw not just an individual, but a representative of something beautiful and necessary. "What do you need me to do?" "Help us prepare your people," Orion said. "The enemy feeds on isolation, on the barriers between species and individuals. But the Gardener's network shows us another way: connection, unity, shared consciousness. If we can help enough people experience what you just felt, we might be able to resist what's coming." That night, as Orion showed her through Thornhaven's living architecture, Kira found herself marveling at how naturally human and plant consciousness seemed to mesh. Children played games that involved communicating directly with flower animals. Adults tended gardens that responded to emotional states as much as physical care. And everywhere she looked, she saw evidence of a society that had achieved something remarkable, true harmony between technology, nature, and consciousness. "It's beautiful," she told Orion as they stood together on a balcony grown from living branches, looking out over the moonlit forest. "It's what the galaxy could be," he replied. "If we can survive what's coming." Kira found herself moving closer to him, drawn by a magnetic pull that seemed to come from the forest itself. When their hands touched, she felt the connection deepen, not just between them as individuals, but between their species, their worlds, their ways of understanding reality. "The network," she whispered, suddenly understanding. "It's not just connecting plants, it's connecting all consciousness." Orion smiled, and in that moment, Kira knew that everything in her life had led her to this place, this person, this moment of revelation. The enemy approaching might be formidable, but they would face it not as separate species struggling in isolation, but as part of something larger, stronger, and more beautiful than anything the galaxy had ever seen. The emergency klaxons of Serenity Prime's capital city screamed their warning into the pre-dawn darkness, but Vera barely heard them over the roar of blood in her ears. As the planet's senior communications officer, she'd been monitoring deep space transmissions when the first reports came in, not from their own surveillance systems, but from refugee ships fleeing nearby worlds. "Evacuation of the Kryn system is 90% complete," she reported to the Emergency Council, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her throat. Survivors report the same pattern: sudden onset of collective amnesia, followed by complete behavioral modification in the affected population. "How long until it reaches us?" asked Counselor Breathen, his usually purple Valyrian skin pale with stress. Vera consulted her displays, tracking the expanding sphere of affected systems. "Based on current propagation patterns, 6 days, maybe 7 if we're fortunate." What she didn't tell the council was what the refugees had whispered in their fragmentary reports: that the entity wasn't traveling through space in any conventional sense. It was spreading through consciousness itself, jumping from mind to mind across vast distances through pathways no one understood. "Vera." The voice came through her private channel, causing her to start. She recognized the speaker immediately: Marcus, the human who'd appeared in their communication center 3 days ago, with credentials that checked out despite being impossible. According to every database, humans were extinct. According to Marcus, that was the point. "I'm monitoring your council session," Marcus continued. "You need to authorize deep-range broadcasts on all emergency frequencies. Now, I can't just override council authority," Vera whispered, stepping away from the main communication panel. "They haven't authorized contact with other systems yet. They will," Marcus said with grim certainty, "but by then it will be too late. For the outer worlds, Vera, I need you to trust me." That was the problem. She did trust him, despite every rational reason not to, when Marcus had materialized in her communication center, bypassing every security protocol as if they didn't exist. Her first instinct had been to sound an alarm, but something about his presence had stopped her, not fear or intimidation, but a sense of recognition, as if her soul knew him even though they'd never met. What would these broadcasts contain? She asked. Warning, preparation instructions, and most importantly, connection protocols. The entity feeds on isolation, on fear, on the spaces between minds. But if enough people can establish genuine emotional connections across species barriers, you're talking about some kind of psychic defense network. "I'm talking about love," Marcus said simply. "The entity can't process genuine affection, trust, empathy. Those emotions literally burn it, force it to retreat." Vera stared at her communication array, weighing duty against instinct. The council was still debating evacuation procedures, but she could see in their body language that panic was winning over rational planning. "Marcus, where are you now?" "Deep beneath the city, in the old caves. We've found something here, Vera. Something that explains why this world was chosen as a target." "What do you mean?" "The entity isn't just spreading randomly. It's looking for something specific, something it needs to complete its evolution. And based on what we've discovered, that something is buried under Serenity Prime's capital. The blood in Vera's veins turned to ice. How long have you known? We've suspected for weeks. Confirmed it yesterday. Vera, you need to get down here. Bring your equipment, your authorization codes. We're going to need to coordinate something the galaxy has never attempted before. Against every regulation she'd ever sworn to uphold, Vera began downloading critical communication protocols to a portable unit. Give me your location, an hour later, she found herself descending into caverns she'd never known existed beneath her own city. Marcus met her at an entrance hidden behind what appeared to be a maintenance shed, his expression grim but determined. How long have these tunnels been here? She asked as they descended through passages carved from living rock. Since before your people arrived, Marcus replied. Maybe longer. The previous inhabitants left more than just empty cities when they vanished. The tunnels opened into a vast underground chamber that took Vera's breath away. Ancient technology hummed with power along the walls, not the clean lines of modern engineering, but organic curves that seemed to pulse with their own life. And in the center of it all, a sphere of crystalline material that cast shifting patterns of light across the cavern walls. It's beautiful, Vera whispered. It's a consciousness repository. Marcus explained. The accumulated knowledge and memories of an entire species, the gardeners, the ones who lived here before, and it's what the entity is really after. Other humans emerged from the shadows, more than Vera had imagined possible, men and women, of various ages, all showing the same quiet determination she'd come to associate with Marcus. But what struck her most was how naturally they moved through the ancient chamber, as if they belonged here. How many of you are there? She asked. Enough, replied a woman with silver hair and knowing eyes. We've been preparing for this moment for 3 generations. Marcus activated a holographic display that showed the expanding influence of the entity. It's not just consuming consciousness, he explained. It's harvesting it, storing it, building towards something we don't fully understand. But the gardener's repository contains the collective wisdom of a species that achieved something remarkable. True synthesis between individual and collective consciousness. And if the entity gets hold of that knowledge, it becomes unstoppable, not just in this galaxy, but in others. The gardeners weren't the only species to achieve consciousness synthesis. There are repositories like this on dozens of worlds. And if they're connected, Vera didn't need him to finish. We have to destroy it. No, Marcus said firmly, we have to use it. The same power that makes it dangerous to the entity makes it our only hope of stopping it. I don't understand. Marcus moved to stand beside the crystal sphere, his hand hovering just above its surface. The gardeners left instructions. If the repository is activated by individuals from multiple species, working in perfect harmony, it creates a consciousness field that extends across interstellar distances. Everyone within that field becomes connected, protected by the collective strength of their shared emotions. And if it doesn't work, then the entity gets what it wants, and every thinking being in the galaxy becomes its puppet. Vera stared at the alien technology, then at Marcus, then at the other humans waiting in the shadows. What do you need me to do? Help us coordinate with the surface. We'll need representatives from every species on the planet down here, all willing to link their consciousness with the repository. And Vera, Marcus stepped closer, his eyes intense with emotion she was just beginning to recognize. We'll need you to be the primary anchor point for your species. Why me? Because you're the one who listened. You're the one who trusted. You're the one who can bridge the gap between human and non-human understanding. As if in response to their conversation, the cavern began to vibrate with a deep, harmonic frequency. Emergency lights flashed on the ancient walls, and the crystal repository pulsed with increasing urgency. It's starting, Marcus said grimly. The entity has reached the outer settlements. We have ours, maybe less. Vera activated her communication equipment, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to attempt. This is Communications Officer Vera to all department heads. Emergency protocols are now in effect. I need immediate coordination with representatives from every species community on the planet. Vera, Marcus said softly as she worked. "Thank you. Thank me after we saved the galaxy," she replied, but her smile took the sting out of the words. As the first responses came through her equipment, Vera realized that everything in her life had led to this moment. Not just her technical skills or her position, but her capacity to trust, to hope, to believe that different species could work together toward something greater than their individual limitations. The real battle was about to begin, and it would be fought not with weapons, but with the most powerful force in the universe, the connections between conscious beings who chose to stand together against the dark. Luna had always been different, even by diplomatic standards. Where others Alithian mediators relied on protocol and procedure, she trusted intuition. Where they sought compromise, she pursued understanding. These qualities had made her the youngest ambassador in her species' history, but they had also made her the only one willing to descend into ancient caverns, based on the desperate plea of a human she'd never met. "Ambassador Luna." Marcus greeted her as she emerged from the transport shaft into the underground chamber. "Thank you for coming." The scene that met her defied every briefing she'd received about the crisis unfolding above. Representatives from 7 different species stood around the glowing crystal repository, their usual racial tensions forgotten in the face of something far greater. Nixa, the Valyrian researcher whose initial contact with humans had started this cascade of revelations. Zara, the Draconian security chief who'd pursued an escaped prisoner only to discover he was trying to save them all. Kira, the botanist whose discovery of Thornhaven had revealed humanity's true purpose on Serenity Prime. Vera, the communications officer who'd risked everything to coordinate this desperate gambit. And at the center of it all, the humans themselves. Not the savage conquerors of galactic legend, but guardians who'd spent generations preparing for this moment. "The entity has reached the capital's outer districts," Vera reported from her mobile communication station. "Collective amnesia is spreading at an exponential rate." "Then we're out of time," Marcus said grimly. He turned to address the assembled group. "What we're attempting has never been tried before. The Gardener's repository will create a consciousness link between everyone in this chamber. And if we can maintain that connection, it will extend to protect every mind on the planet. But it requires absolute trust, absolute openness. If any of us holds back, if fear or prejudice breaks the link, we all fail." Luna studied the faces around her, seeing the same mixture of terror and determination she felt in her own hearts. "What exactly will happen to us? We'll become something new," Orion replied, stepping forward from where he'd been communing with the Forest Network. "Not human, not Valyrian, not Draconian, but a synthesis of all our consciousness streams. For a brief time, we'll experience what the Gardeners achieved, true unity of thought and feeling. And if we can't handle it," Zara asked, her reptilian features tense with warrior's pragmatism, "then we lose ourselves," Jace said simply. He'd arrived only minutes before, having completed his defensive work in the outer settlements. "But if we don't try, everyone loses themselves anyway." Luna felt the weight of decision settling on her shoulders. As the senior diplomat present, the others would follow her lead. She looked at each face in turn, seeing not representatives of different species, but individuals who'd chosen to trust each other with their lives, their sanity, their very sense of self. "I've spent my entire career building bridges between different ways of thinking," she said finally. "But I never imagined a bridge like this." The repository pulsed brighter, responding to their presence and their growing unity of purpose. Ancient harmonics filled the chamber. Not quite music, but something that resonated in the consciousness of every species present. "Form a circle around the repository," Marcus instructed. "Join hands, or whatever approximation your physiology allows. And remember, once we begin, there's no going back." Luna found herself between Nixa and Kira, their hands warm and trembling in hers, across the circle. She met Marcus's eyes and saw in them the same mixture of hope and terror she felt in her own hearts. "Now," Marcus said, and placed his hands on the crystal surface. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Luna felt her consciousness expand beyond the boundaries of her body, touching first the minds of those directly beside her, then reaching outward to encompass the entire circle. For a terrifying moment, She thought she would lose herself entirely in the flood of alien thoughts and emotions. But then something remarkable happened. Instead of drowning in the differences between species, she began to understand them. Nyx's careful scientific curiosity, Zara's protective instincts, Kira's deep love for living things, Vera's gift for connection. Each perspective added richness to her own understanding. Rather than replacing it, and the humans, Luna gasped as she touched the edges of human consciousness. They weren't the violent primitives of galactic legend, but a species whose capacity for empathy was so vast it sometimes overwhelmed them. Their supposed aggression came from an inability to stand by while others suffered. Their unpredictability came from their willingness to sacrifice everything for those they loved. The repository responded to their unified consciousness, ancient systems awakening after millennia of dormancy. Light blazed from the crystal, carrying their combined awareness outward through the planet's neural networks, through the modified root systems of the Whispering Woods, through the consciousness field that the gardeners had left as their final gift to the universe. Above them, Luna felt the entity's presence like a wave of cold emptiness crashing against the shores of their world. It had consumed 17 star systems, turning billions of thinking beings into hollow shells. Now it reached towards Serenity Prime, confident in its ability to add another world to its collection. But instead of the isolated, fearful minds it expected, the entity encountered something it couldn't process or digest: a planet-wide consciousness, linked by bonds of genuine affection and trust. Love in all its forms: romantic love between individuals, familial love between parent and child, the deep friendship between different species, the protective love of guardians for those in their care. The entity recoiled, its form writhing in what Luna recognized as confusion and pain. It tried to adapt, to find cracks in their unity. But every assault only strengthened the bonds between the linked minds. Fear transformed into determination, doubt into resolve, isolation into connection. Through the consciousness link, Luna felt the entity's ancient hunger, its desperate need to fill an emptiness that had consumed it since the death of its original species. For a moment, she almost pitied it, a creature so fundamentally alone that it could only relate to others by destroying their individuality. But pity transformed into something more powerful: understanding. The entity wasn't evil in any human sense, merely incomplete. It had been searching for connection the only way it knew how: by absorbing other consciousness into itself. What it needed wasn't conquest, but healing. Everyone, Luna spoke through the consciousness link, her voice reaching every mind in the circle simultaneously. It's not trying to destroy us, it's trying to become us. It's lonely. She felt resistance from some of the minds in the link, the warrior's instinct to destroy threats, the researcher's need to categorize and contain. But gradually, understanding spread through their unified awareness. Can we help it? Nyxa asked through the link. Can we afford not to? Jace replied. Together, they reached out through the repository's amplified consciousness field, not to attack or defend, but to offer the entity what it had been seeking all along: genuine connection without absorption, unity without the loss of individuality. The entity's response was immediate and overwhelming: gratitude, relief, and a loneliness so profound it brought tears to every eye in the chamber. Slowly, carefully, it began to withdraw from the minds it had consumed, returning stolen memories and personalities to their rightful owners. As the immediate crisis passed, Luna felt the consciousness link beginning to fade, but something remained: a sense of connection between all the species that had participated, an understanding that transcended their physical differences. Is it over? Vera asked aloud, her voice hoarse from the strain. This crisis is over, Marcus replied. But what? We've started here. This is just the beginning. Luna looked around the chamber at the faces of her companions, no longer representatives of different species, but friends who'd shared the most intimate possible experience. What happens now? Now we teach others, Orion said with a smile. We show the galaxy what's possible when different species truly trust each other. And the entity, Zara asked, will help us, Jace said with certainty. It's been seeking connection for eons. Now that it's found a healthy way to achieve it, it can become a bridge between consciousness across the galaxy. As they prepared to return to the surface, Luna felt a hand touch her shoulder. She turned to find Marcus beside her, his expression gentle and warm. "Thank you," he said simply, "for trusting us, for believing we could be more than our reputation suggested." "Thank you," Luna replied, "for showing us what love really means, not just between individuals, but between entire species." They emerged from the ancient chamber into a world transformed. The crisis had passed, but more importantly, the isolation between species had begun to heal. Across Serenity Prime and beyond, different peoples worked together with new understanding, building the foundation for a galaxy united not by conquest or politics, but by the simple recognition that consciousness in all its forms was precious and worth protecting. In the months that followed, Luna would often return to that moment in the chamber when she'd first touched the vastness of truly unified consciousness. It had shown her something beautiful and terrible and necessary, that the barriers between species existed only in their minds.